Okay, so welcome everybody to the WDW Node.Js Talk. I am Graham. I'm from Cebu in the Philippines, and I'm a sophomore in ECE. Today, I will be teaching you all about Node.js, a JavaScript runtime for building scalable network applications. So what is Node.js? Well, it's an open source, cross-platform, and asynchronous JavaScript runtime. Let me break down these words a bit. So open source is becoming this very popular trend in tech, really. And what it means is that your code is publicly available for any developer on the internet to contribute to. And this is really helpful for like medium, large projects because like if there are bugs, I mean, because with these large projects, there are going to be so many bugs, and you can't really expect a small group of developers to catch them all. And so what's nice about Node.js being open source is that when bugs are found by other people who actually use Node.js, they can file issues and alert the developers about them. And so then the core developers can fix those bugs, or even the developers that found the bugs can fix it themselves and make a pull request on the repository and have it patched. Aside from that, it's cross-platform, meaning you only need to code once, and your code will run on Windows, Mac, Linux, whatever you decide to use. And you don't have to worry about any compatibility issues for the most part. It's also asynchronous. It allows Node.js to be blazingly fast. So if you have incoming requests, you don't need to. I mean, like you wouldn't want your web server to lag if there are like multiple requests coming into your server. Don't worry about that too much. But yeah, basically, Node.js is fast. Also, Node.js is powered by Google's V8 JavaScript engine. Now, that name was enough to convince me to want to learn Node.js just because it sounds really cool. It's like a car engine. Well, actually, it's like similar to a car engine though, because it takes in fuel, which would be your JavaScript code, and then it starts to run, hence making your server. What's also great about Node.js is that it has package management with NPM, or the Node Package Manager. So if you've ever done any medium to large projects with Java or C++, and you've used external libraries, then you know how much of a hassle it is to have to download these external libraries and have to figure out how to put them into your project, dependency conflicts, and there's just so much to have to deal with. But with Node.js, installing external libraries is as easy as typing npm install into your library, and boom, that library is there for you. If you use Python, it's very similar to pip. So in the same way you can use pip install, you can use npm install with Node.js, and boom, it's easy. Now, hopefully, I've convinced you that Node.js is worth learning, but then there's a question of who exactly uses Node.js, because like maybe it's useful, but what if it's like just some weird, obscure library that nobody actually uses? So why should you learn this? Well, some companies, actually many big companies actually do use Node.js. So tell me in the chat if you recognize any of these company logos. Um, Hopefully you recognize some of them since the names are in the logos themselves. I see. So okay, there's Capital One, yes. Oh, NASA, yeah. First line. Yeah, there. So I think a lot of you probably know most, if not all, of these company logos, because these are pretty big companies, and they put their trust in Node.js. Yes, that is Medium. These companies put their trust in Node.js because Node.js is blazingly fast, and so that allows their products and platforms to be blazingly fast. So for example, let's say PayPal. You know, PayPal is widely used for all sorts of payment platforms, and having something like Node.js handle the backend, handle all these payment requests, allows their platform, their product, to handle all the like this huge volume of payment traffic without delays. I mean, if you were a seller of some product and suddenly your customers want to check out, but then like let's say 5 customers check out, but then your payment processing is slow, like it takes 5 minutes to get checked out just to pay, then of course people are going to get discouraged and be like, oh, I don't want to buy things anymore. So people would go away from using PayPal just because it's slow. But then these companies recognize how fast Node.js is, and that's where they put their trust into it. And hopefully after this talk, you'll also be convinced to put your trust into Node.js as well. So what exactly do you do with Node.js? Well, you do RESTful API development. If you were able to attend Pranav's wonderful talk on RESTful APIs with Flask yesterday, then you might have an idea about what REST APIs are. If not, that's totally fine. I will give a brief rundown about what REST APIs are and how they're used to build the modern internet today. The basics of REST APIs, it's a way for developers to design interfaces allowing end users or other developers to interact with your system. So for example, here we have a diagram. You have your front end or your website. And so collectively, your website, whether you're using React or just HTML, CSS, that's collectively called your front end. So it's the components that are displayed to your end users. Now, if your website is displaying some sort of dynamic data, like data from a database of some sort, it's not just static content, it has to pull that data from somewhere. Now, normally you have some other software running on your backend. And now so your front end, what it does is that it sends requests to your API. So as you can see in the diagram, the API is the bridge between your front end and your back end. It's like if your back end is another island and your front end, if your back end is island A and your front end is island B, API is the bridge between that. And so what the API does is it's a standard of accepting requests from your front end, and it basically guarantees that your backend knows what exactly your front end is asking for, what type of data it's asking for. And so then your server backend can translate these requests into operations on your database, whether it's retrieving data from the database to be displayed, or whether it's like operating onto your database to insert or modify the existing data. So how we will go into a bit more detail in the next slide. So again, the front end sends requests to your API, and your API basically translates these requests into actual operations on your database, on your server. Now, I've been mentioning requests a lot. Now, let's explain a bit better about what these requests actually are. So there are actually different types of requests that are sent. So we're focusing on HTTP requests. HTTP is what a lot of the modern internet uses. Actually, there's HTTPS, but that is a topic for another day. But so for now, so there's get, post, delete, and put requests. So when you have get requests, this is for accessing data or reading data. So let's say you have a weather site. You have some sort of database that contains weather forecasts. Then your website has to pull the weather forecast for that day. So it sends a get request to the server to say, oh, what's the temperature for today? Then we have post requests for inserting data. So what if, let's say you have a registration system. A user signs up and fills in their information. Since as a new user, you don't have their information yet in their database. You're inserting new data. You're creating a new user into your database. That is what post requests are for. Then there's delete requests. Let's say a person decides to deactivate their account and they want their information completely removed from your database. That's a delete request. Put request is for updating. Let's say you are a user on some system and you want to change your display name. You can use a put request for that. Now, knowing the difference of between these types of requests isn't, of course, the most important part, but it's very helpful to know because these are standards that developers typically use. In fact, the first two are actually the most common ones that you will be seeing often. But yes, these four are quite important. Now that we've established what these different requests are, what an API is, what a RESTful API is, let's go into like how exactly you do that with Node.js. So let's look at this sample of code. Now with Node.js, it's as simple as that. Now you have a basic server. Now, as you can see, it's actually written in JavaScript. And as I mentioned earlier, Node.js is a JavaScript runtime. So as expected, your code will be written in JavaScript. And now this code, don't worry, it might seem like a lot to take in, but you'll be going more into detail about what each line means in the lab later. But also, if this seems like a bit of a lot of code, there are these numbers being thrown around here, headers. What's interesting though is that there is an even easier way to write Node.js code, and that is using Express.js. Now, Node.js is powerful, yes, but with the help of additional frameworks, that can make Node.js even more powerful and even easier to use. So Express.js is a powerful Node.js framework for building minimal web frameworks. So what exactly is a web framework? I mean, frameworks, before learning about web frameworks, all I knew about frameworks were like, they're the things for like buildings and stuff. They're like a skeleton. Well, when we're talking about web frameworks, they're like libraries. They're like add-ons to Node.js. So if Node.js is your wonderful vanilla ice cream, which is the superior ice cream flavor, fight me. If Node.js is your vanilla ice cream, while Express is your chocolate syrup and cherry on top, it makes Node.js even better. And it makes things really easy to use and just so much more enjoyable. So as you can see, compared to the previous slide, the code is way shorter now. And as you can see here, the first line, you're just importing the Express module. Next part, you're initializing what Express is. And then next, we have app.get. You're initializing a route. So this means that if you send requests to your website, so let's say google.com, that resolves to google.com/, it's the same thing. So then that goes to this handler. So you're sending your server will reply with a request. And so if you were running the server and you sent a request to the root route, you would see the text WDW 2020. And that's it, you have your server. And then this last part is simply just for starting your server. It's saying, start my server on port 5000. And once that's done, it's just gonna print the console, server started, just so you know that your server is like up and running. Now, if you're not familiar with the concept of ports, I've linked a good resource explaining what these are in the lab write-up, so do check that out later if you're a bit confused, but otherwise don't worry. Now, okay, we have a basic Express server now, but what exactly can you do with this? Like, how do I, like if I wanted to get data for a specific day, for example, let's consider a weather forecasting site. How do I get data for a specific day? Do I have to make one of these for every single day? Well, luckily, these libraries have ways to make things dynamically. So you can do that through a thing called querying. So you send queries from your browser. In the same way, you know, if you're asking someone, you're asking them a query of some sort. And so here you can send, so let's say at the endpoint, hello, you can ask a query, you can send a query for like name, a query parameter. So if you do a Google search, you'll see this thing with like question marks and equal signs in your URL. So these are your query parameters. When you send a GET request, you can attach them as additional arguments. And so this gets sent to your server. And this is a way for your server to know additional information that's being sent in your request. So you will see in your lab later on how you can use these queries to empower your API and make things more powerful, such as like if you want to ask for information for a specific day, you can simply specify the day and then do a corresponding if statement depending on what day you want to ask for. So now we have querying done. How exactly do you test this? Now you can use this thing called Postman. Actually, I recall shortly before the talk, someone asked if you could use a different platform aside from Postman. That's perfectly fine. So, but for those of you who aren't familiar with testing yet, Postman is a wonderful tool for testing your API endpoints. And so why is this important? So we showed earlier that if you had your API, you could supply a query argument like name. I could pass my name Graham. But what if you wanted to add a space in your name. Let's say I want to put my name Graham DU. And then if you were to pass this in your browser, if I put a space in the URL, it's going to become a Google search. So how exactly do I pass these arguments into the actual request? Well, Postman simplifies this for you. You can actually just here you can specify the value, and it's a lot easier to handle because you have these it's in a tabular mode. You can enable, disable things. It's just so much more organized to look at. And this is just a tip of the iceberg for how powerful Postman really is. And as we go along in your journey with building RESTful APIs, Postman will be your best friend. And so now that we've established like how to build a basic Node.js app with Express, how do you get started? Well, to get started, just come up with a folder where you want to make your project. In your terminal, just type npm init, npm install express, and you have your project ready to go. Now, of course, this might be a bit confusing about like how to get started. And again, the lab later will be a great opportunity to get hands-on experience for learning how to use Node.js. So stick around for after this talk. But that's about it for Node.js. Now, hopefully you understand a bit about Node.js, but if you have any questions, now the floor is open. So I will check the chat now for any questions. Oh, okay. So if you run the server, okay, yeah. So that's a good point. You can type node index dot yeah. So if example you have your file that's a JS file, you can just type node index.js, assuming so npm start is another way, but you need to configure your package.json. So actually that's a good thing to do. Npm start, yeah. That's another way. It's actually in the lab, so we can actually proceed to the lab now. And if anyone has questions, like still just feel free to ask. But yes, there is a write-up that shows like how to go from nothing really to building your application. So I think that's it's a more streamlined flow of things. Oh, so npm install express. This is for installing the Express library, and that allows us to make the easy to see code. Easy to use code with Express because it simplifies things a lot. Yes, the recorded session will be uploaded later. Would Node die? What do you mean? Is this about Deno or? Oh, okay. Will the process terminate? You can it shouldn't terminate on its own unless if actually if you're not starting a server, then it will terminate on its own. It's just like a regular script. Like once it's done, it just turns off. It just terminates. But if you're running an Express server or a Node server, it shouldn't terminate until you stop it with like a Control C or Command C. Vincent, good question. Actually, you could use Postman to respond to the CMU Daily COVID questionnaire, assuming you can figure out how the requests are being, how the arguments are being sent. Now, if you can figure that out, then yes, you could probably automate that. Actually, there is one caveat though, because the CMU Daily COVID questionnaire relies on you being logged into the system. So you would also have to figure out how to go like bypass the authentication or simulate your own authentication headers. And yes, that's if you can figure that part out, then yes, you could simulate stuff with Postman so that you don't have to log in and you can just like click once and fill up the questionnaire.